Well, it is going to be, it is being recorded and will go on.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I keep forgetting that. That's right. No, yeah. Well, the book that Pastor Mark's been leading in, Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, is the one that I talked about early on, and it was the one actually that I used as part of a course that I was teaching at Masters years ago. And what's really good about it is that it has a section on everything, all the major components of what is to live the Christian life, or disciplines of the Christian life, like prayer and worship, evangelism, serving, stewardship, fasting, silence, and solitude, which most of us are able to use right now, or are going to be experts in, I should say, from here on. And journaling, which a lot of people don't do, and I don't do it as faithfully as I should either. But the one we'll talk about tonight for a few minutes is learning, and talk a little bit about that. I see Eleanor come on here. Eleanor, are you there? She's trying to get on, I think. Anyway, when I was growing up, I think the way we always viewed it was that learning was something you do when you got your grade 12 or your vocational diploma or your education or whatever. That was pretty much the end of it. You really didn't need to learn much else unless you were actually changing careers or something like this. The only person who really needed to keep up on stuff was a doctor or a nurse or somebody like that who needed to continue with lifelong learning. By the time I got to university and college stage, that era, it quickly became apparent that more and more was being talked about lifelong learning and continuing to learn throughout your life. That wasn't just about education while you were in school, but it was a long process because things were changing so much. That's not to say the Bible changes. That's not the point at all. It's just that there's so much written about it. There's so many wonderful perspectives and so much out there that and so much application to the changing world we live in. That there's no such thing as stopping to learn. Like there's no such thing as just simply ceasing, which is a good thing. So when you look at education, we're not talking about when we're talking about learning here. We're not talking about formal education. We only do that for a short period of our lives, but the rest of our life we're learning. But there's some people who draw a line between scholarship. We'll call it scholarship for now, although that's not really a good term for it. Let's call it learning. Between learning and being really devoted to the Lord, they put a dichotomy there. You can't have both. I mean, if you're devoted to the Lord, it's not education. It's education, not devoted to the Lord. And a lot of people have drawn that line, unfortunately. It's really a false choice because Jesus said, learn of me, right? Learn of me. Follow me, learn of me. And now the downside is you can know lots, and there are people who know lots about the Bible and know lots of theology, but it hasn't reached the heart. And unless it reaches the heart, then it's really a pointless exercise. So that's the other side of it. Knowing so much. I went to university back years ago in the early 70s, and Oral and Hilda knows the school very well. Memorial, of course, in St. John's. They had a religious studies department, and none of us who were Pentecostal, or very, very few, there might have been one or two of us who ever took courses there, because we always felt, and I think rightly so, that most of the courses that they were offering were very much treating the Bible as a piece of literature, but nothing else. It wasn't for sake of application to life. There were a couple of good professors on there, actually. One of them is still living and retired and spent his life there, and it's very good. But generally speaking, they were liberal. Knowing how the Bible was written, the documents that brought the Bible to what we have it today, was all very much that. It was an academic pursuit. entirely academic pursuit with very little application. So that's the other side of it. But that's not to say, of course, that we should not seek to know more and learn more and so on. And let me just say the other side again: zeal without knowledge is just as bad. If you have lots of heart, lots of zeal, lots of energy, lots of passion, but little knowledge, that can be very, very dangerous. And pastors over the years have had to rein in people who really get off the rails because they are very excited about serving the Lord, but they really don't have much background, much training, much knowledge, much direction. And so that's the other side of it, and it's striking that balance between the two. So let me just throw this out there for you a second. Let you grab onto this concept. Well, when we use the word disciple, by the way, that's an old term when we use the word disciple. And I think it's still as relevant today as it ever was. It's such a broad term. People use it very loosely. But disciple, we generally mean, when we say disciple, a person is a follower of Jesus. We say a follower of Jesus, disciple of Jesus, and I use it interchangeably in my preaching as well. But a follower is also a learner. A follower is a learner. A follower is a person who listens to what Jesus has to say, who reads the word, who allows the Spirit to illuminate the word. And so we're always, as Christians, learning. So that's my take at the front end here of how this shakes down, is that you can't have all head without heart, and you can't have heart without having some head. You have to have head knowledge and so on, of even the most basic. But I think in Pentecostal circles, one of the dangers, well, let me just throw it out to you. Let me ask you the question. Where have we emphasized more? Which side have we leaned more to as Pentecostals? Head, heart?
Heart.
Yeah, I think so. I wonder, why is that so? Because I think if you were to talk to a lot of Baptist people, Anglican people, they would probably lean more toward head. Maybe. Got to be careful in making that generalization, but yeah. Why is that so? Why have we always emphasized heart?
I think because you're saying that that you have to be in the Spirit, and to be in the Spirit means that you have to be willing to go with the Spirit, and that means that you're engaged. So it's more than just head.
Yeah, you're right. You're on the track there. The Pentecostals, we've always emphasized the transforming of the heart, right? The transforming of the person, and the moving of the Holy Spirit, and so on, more than we've emphasized the head knowledge, And there's a point to that, because Pentecostalism was a reaction in many ways to some of the formality, the rigidity of some of the other denominations. A lot of people came out of other denominations because they found they were too heady, right? Too heady, too formal, and there's a lot of truth to that. The cold doctrine, without any feeling of a connection to God in that sense. Yeah, so that's true. Yeah. So how does learning, let's use the word learning, how does learning make us better worshipers? How does learning make us better worshipers? Well, I guess we can't worship someone we don't really know, right? That we haven't learned about, right? And somebody want to read Proverbs chapter 9, verse 9. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 9. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 9.
Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning.
Yeah. Notice something important here in those two. Pastor Mark, read again. One, it says one used the word wise, one used the word righteous. Just read it one more time.
Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning.
Yeah, both those statements are almost identical. And that's the way, of course, Hebrew poetry was. They were two statements together, and they were almost identical, maybe slightly different, but almost the same thing. But the point is this: it's almost ironic. Why do you call a wise person teachable? Usually, a wise person doesn't need to be taught. Why is a wise person that says is teachable, right? A righteous person will add to their knowledge. What does that mean?
Well, wise meaning that the person is not wise, but they are bright to know the difference between. They know that to learn, you have to be able to open your heart to learn. You have to be able to open your mind to learn.
Yeah.
So you can't learn without being wise, because you're wise enough to know that you don't know everything.
Yeah, that's the point. You're humble enough to understand that you don't know everything. So the Proverbs, the Word of God calls that being wise.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're humble enough to say, I need to know more, I'm teachable, that's wisdom. Wisdom is not thinking I know it all. Wisdom is actually thinking I don't know it all.
Right.
Is living with that. I don't, and I mean that's a very liberating thought when you think what the Bible calls us wise, it calls us righteous. If we admit that we don't know it all and that we can learn. Yeah. So Ellen, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, welcome home.
Thank you.
Good to have you back. I knew you were on the way. I wasn't sure what day you were arriving.
I arrived on Monday night.
And you're doing well?
Doing very well.
Wonderful.
Yesterday was a bit of a blur, but today is much better. Thank you.
The jet lag, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, listen, we'll get a chance to talk a lot more in the days to come.
Okay.
Yeah, but welcome home.
Thank you.
A wise person admits that and Paul, of course, talks to as a Timothy or Titus about a person who is a leader as to be teachable, right? Not a novice, but teachable. And probably that's one of the greatest, one of the greatest challenges we have in the Western world is that some or other once you receive your diploma, once you've gotten your degrees and all that kind of thing, you're not really, you don't really need to know anything else. You're not really teachable. But I think something all of us need to learn is to be teachable. Even those of us who've been around for longer and leadership a lot longer, we all have so much to learn, and we'll never ever get to that point where we'll learn it all. Yeah.
Ewen, it reminds me of kind of the end of first semester of college. You walk into college, and by the time the first break comes through, the first little reading week there, you kind of figure that you've learned it all. Like you've been exposed to so much that you never knew. You kind of go home on the weekend halfway through the first semester thinking you know it all. And by the time you finish the first semester and get through the first set of exams, you all of a sudden realize all you've done is open this can of worms that you didn't even know existed beforehand.
Right.
And there's so much more to learn, and you're looking forward to the next 3 years of education, or however many years you're going to go for. But it's all of a sudden like, wow, all you've done is just cracked open the can and realize that the world is so much bigger. And I guess that's kind of what he's saying in Proverbs there is,
I think yes.
I
think, yes, absolutely. And I think that the mark of an educated person or a mature person is actually understanding that very truth, that you have only cracked open the surface, right? Like somebody said when I was in doing my doctoral program, said, wow, he said, it's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant, you know, and that's about it, right? There's so much, and things keep, as I said, there's so much. I mean, every now and then I go and I look at some of the new books that are out and stuff, and people are able to write books faster today because of word processing and stuff. And I look at it and think, wow, there is no end to it. There is no end to it at all. So what you do is you keep growing, keep learning, keep reading, and so on. But let me say this, though. When I say that, I don't mean just reading other people's books, and that's not exactly what the author's talking about here, though that's certainly a part of it. But learning in the sense of reading the word, digesting the word, you know, and reading books that have to do directly with it, and so on. But that's what it means in terms of being a follower of Jesus. There's a statement that he makes. I'm going to throw out here. He says, if you have the book, I'm not sure if you do, let's see, whatever. It's on page, doesn't matter. But he says, God is glorified when we use the mind he made to learn of him, his ways, his word, and his world. God is glorified when we use the mind that he made to learn of him, to learn of his ways, to learn his word, and to learn his world. Yeah. So how is God glorified when we use our minds? That's the fundamental question. We use our hands to glorify him. We use our mouths to glorify him. But how is he glorified when we use our minds to glorify him?
Doesn't the light bulb go off and you kind of go, wow, this is really true? I mean, don't you kind of get that revelation when revelation comes and you kind of go, wow, there's something here that I didn't see before?
Yeah, Jesus said, you know, when they asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Yeah. That's the one we probably have left out some. We haven't emphasized the mind. But glorifying God with your mind. A lot of people who get involved in education and teach, a lot of people who get involved in education, they really sincerely believe, and I think it's right, they really sincerely believe that they are glorifying God with their mind. That's what God called them to do. And in many ways, I've felt that way myself is what I've done is you feel like you're glorifying God with with your mind, with your intellect. But again, I want to be careful here to steer it away from the formal academic world, because that's not exactly, we've had people in our church, for example, who are self-taught. And we know people, I know that Oral and Hilda, both of us, we know people from our backgrounds who were self-taught. They read the word, they knew the scripture, they were just into it as much, if not more, than some academics. They may not have had the breadth of the foundation, but they had the intensity. In our church, I think particularly of Ken McAleese. Ken's passed on to be with the Lord now. Ken was that type of person. Very well read. He had tons of books around. Some of them are in my office now that he gave me before he passed away. Sermon books, all sorts of things like that. Some people are that way. They just live that life of reading the word and grasping it and applying it, and they do it with a good heart. So I think that when we do that, it's the same thing as when we work with our hands, work with our words or whatever, our deeds. Yeah, we also work with our minds as well. And this is a lesson. I mean, this is a lesson that, as I said before, Pentecostals probably need to hear more than others. That it's not just feeling. Charismatics and Pentecostals need to hear it in particular, because we've been so easily just lapping up what other people say. without really grasping it for ourselves. I tell you one thing, if there's one thing that would really gladden my heart as a pastor, is to know that every person in Church on the Hill is into the Word. And Pastor Mark will be the same. That is the number one drive. Of course, in prayer too, of course, but to know that people are, because people are in the Word are going to be in the prayer anyway. I mean, that's going to happen that way. But rarely the other way around. But to know that people are actively seeking God through the Word, meditating, and so on. That it's phenomenal. I fear, though, that in the culture we've had in recent times, that we depend too much on probably what happens on Sunday morning or what happens in Bible studies like this, without really doing it for ourselves. Because remember, those disciplines here in this, they're talking about in this book, are disciplines that have to do with the person. They're not talking about corporate disciplines here. These are individual disciplines, every one of them. Even the worship one is individual discipline, as I recall, is in Pastor Mark, it has to do with personal worship. So these are all personalized. Could you imagine what would happen if all of those disciplines, including the learning discipline, the discipline of learning, were to be implemented the way that they should be? Could you imagine what a change it would make in any church, rather than depending on Bible studies only and Sunday services only? The thought of it is actually exciting when you think of it, what that could mean. Well, there's another question for you. It sort of relates to some of the other ones. Pentecostals, or a lot of Christians for that matter, but I think particularly Pentecostals and charismatics, often accused of being anti-intellectual, anti-education, anti-learning. Why is that so? That's a very widespread accusation, by the way. Why is that so?
I think we want to, I don't want to say validate, but we want to emphasize the authority and the move of the Spirit. And we don't want to risk getting human intelligence in the way. And so as a act of honor to the Spirit, we tip the scales the wrong way.
Too far.
There obviously needs to be a balance. You need to be, into the Word, educated, firmly planted on the Word, doing the Word, knowing the Word, and being led by the Spirit. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we've overemphasized as an act of honor to the Spirit and the move of the Spirit, and we've lost out on the intellect.
Yeah. Do you think that's anybody? Were you going to say something, Kathy? Anybody? No.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I hear that, because I think I think sometimes as you're reading the Bible, you get a little lost. And so I guess the other thing is that sometimes, I guess, then you start putting your spin on it, and I guess you're trying to not just see it as rules, but get, as you say, get the heart part than just the rules. Because sometimes, you get too much of one part, whether you get the rules or you're getting it all at different stages.
Well, again, I think I would come back to the fact too that, let me repeat this in one other way. Our Pentecostal and charismatic world is largely a reaction to all that intellect stuff, that heady stuff that a lot of churches had. I mean, for example, someone who comes out of a mainstream denomination, comes to know the Lord, gets filled with the Spirit, tends to look at their tradition as being way too formal. The liturgy, the Mass, those services, and Pentecostals always viewed themselves as having come out of that. They came out of that into a more heart, into a heart kind of transformation, right? And I mean, I wouldn't exchange that for anything. Seriously, I wouldn't. I just found a balance in it. but you can go, yeah, you can go too far the other way, and that's why a lot of Christians often are often accused of being anti-intellectuals, because they want to emphasize feelings, which is legitimate too, and the heart and the emotions, and so we should, yeah. Somebody want to read Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Romans 12, verse 2. I preached on that one not long ago, so somebody should be able to remember that one. Well, it's a long time ago. It feels like ancient history now. Beseech you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable worship. And verse 2 says, and don't be, somebody?
I think I've got it. Don't be like the people of this world, but let God change the way you think.
Yeah, that's it. That's the be, or some translations be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a powerful passage. Read this: the renewing, in other words, your life can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You renew your mind, your life is transformed. He uses the term, which I've never heard before, which is very nice. It's called, he says, mental renewal. There's such a thing as mental renewal. And I think it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's this renewing of one's mind through constant meditation, prayer, learning, and so on. Let me ask you this question about learning, though. It just occurred to me now. Let me ask this question about learning. Let's step away for a second from just learning the word. Is there? I don't want to get airy fairy here, but is there such a thing as having a spiritual kind of impact by actually focusing on nature and God's creation and so on? Is there some benefit to that in terms of our learning and drawing close to God? I don't think he deals with that anywhere in the book. Mark, why did I ask such a question? I just realized who I'm talking to here. But
the only time that
renewing of your mind. Yeah.
The only time that Don Whitney does approach that is in the chapter on silence and solitude.
Okay.
And he does emphasize and call and challenge the reader to get out, but for the sake of silence and solitude, not for the sake of seeing God in creation particularly.
Yeah.
All right. It's more like take your lawn chair and go sit by the river and turn off the TV and turn off your phone and get away. And when you're away intentionally to meet with God, that's when God will speak to you and you will hear his voice. But it's not that he speaks through the wind and the ducks and the, whatever.
Right,
I mean, we're not getting into Hindu theology here.
It's the environment in which you get close to him, in other words.
It's the shutting off of the busyness of the world to find that quiet place with God. And if you can do it in a closet, do it in a closet, as Priscilla would do, right? I mean, very famous lady right now, she has really has that re-emphasized the prayer closet, right? Yeah. Same idea, but it's that quietness.
I wonder, is there something to be said for even I know that's the shutting down part. I wonder, is there something to be said? I don't want to get mystical about it, but I wonder, is there something to be said for, when we think of mental renewal, though, of the very fact of being in nature. I mean, here's the thing right now. I find that just going outside in the daylight is wonderful right now, after being inside for hours and hours on end, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So there's something to be definitely said for that in terms of mental renewal. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Your old being, your old person, your old being can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. All right. Throughout the book,
Ewan, just
yep.
to continue on that, I remember you were speaking your first thing on Romans, so Romans chapter 1. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature, have clearly been seen, being understood from what
Yeah.
was made, so that
Yeah.
people are without excuse. So
Yeah.
it's not just without excuse, it's
Right.
we can in some way see some of the divine attributes of God in creation.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
is some learning to be done of who God is by getting out in creation if
Yeah.
we are intentionally looking for it and seeking it. And
yeah, that's not where we find God's final revelation. Of course, we find it in Jesus.
no,
But
that's right.
there is something to be said for that, and I think we've probably missed that part too.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, absolutely.
But some people use that as an excuse also, that they, say, oh, I do know God because I know God through his creation.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
there definitely are people that use that term, use that as like, I don't need to know anymore because I know creation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then it's kind of like, I don't have to go to church because I just have to go out to creation. So I think people do use that, not getting into the word to know how else he thought.
That would be an elementary first step, wouldn't it? Right?
Yes. Yeah. That.
Yeah.
I like the term you used, you, and you said that it's not the final revelation.
No, it's not the final revelation.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
certainly a general revelation, but not God's special one. Okay, so what are some? Okay, Whitney throughout the book talks about the overarching theme, of course, is the idea of disciplining yourself in the disciplines. I mean, okay, these are all disciplines, but the idea is disciplining yourself in the disciplines. So you discipline yourself to worship, you discipline yourself to pray, discipline yourself to read the word, to fast, and on, which the flesh doesn't want to do most of the time. And he says, of course, he used the term over and over again, Paul says, for the purpose of godliness, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. And he compares it to a physical workout, right? You gotta work up those muscles, those spiritual muscles is what he's really saying. So what are some of the dangers, which you've probably talked about this before in some of the others, what are some of the dangers of not being disciplined learners? And it comes to learning. So if we're not a disciplined learner, let's say we don't care, we just pick it up by osmosis, they say, you just a little bit here, a little bit there, pastor preaches a sermon here, maybe attend church once every fourth week, by the way, which is what's supposed to be normal now, so you only hear the word once every 3 or 4 weeks. So what the danger of not being a disciplined learner?
Well, I would say you don't get the full story. You're not getting the full story. You're only getting that little piece. So when you're telling somebody, you might be telling them a little piece that you've misunderstood.
Yeah. And what does that lead to?
Well, it leads to that, somebody might get turned off from God over this one little incident that had really nothing to do with the story.
Yeah, you wonder too if it doesn't lead to what we used to call carnal Christians, Was it Paul or Peter said, it was Peter. They should be eating meat by now, but they're still drinking milk, right? Kind of thing. So you can live with a bunch of spiritual babies, right? You can have a bunch of spiritual babies because they've never really learned anything. Yeah. Only by drinking the milk that's fed them. They're not eating meat, right?
Yeah.
So that's a chronic problem in the church, or in churches, not our church necessarily more than others, but that's been a chronic problem. Is the danger of not being intentional with learning is that you really have stunted discipleship, stunted growth, right?
Ephesians, sorry.
Go
Ephesians chapter 4, you're just reminding me now. Like infants being tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Right. So it's that just wishy-washy, no good for nothing, and easily deceived, easily led astray,
Yeah.
because they haven't learned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mark, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say false teaching because they don't know the
Yeah,
difference.
false teaching. Yeah, and that's the other issue. That's the other very important issue, Kathy, is that we led down the road with false teaching. It just occurred to me that second, though, on this point, Mark, that somewhere in the future it would be a good idea. This is a tough one to do. If we provided, maybe between the two of us, provided a list of 10 books that would be good books for every Christian to read. That are books that are not difficult to read, but ones that would be really empowering and enriching, from solid people that we could trust, that we trust, and let you and give them to you so you could even get into ordering them or whatever, Mark. Things like that. These are good things that can be done. Good things.
How soon can you do that?
Sorry, what's that, Oral?
How soon can you provide the list?
You know what? We can probably do that sooner rather than later.
Good
I
idea.
mean, I think it's a great thought. Even though I came up with it, just sounds like Donald Trump now.
But we all have a lot of time on our hands. We can do some reading.
Well, Mark, let's think about that. Let's think about like we don't want to give 25, but let's have 10 that would be really good. Some might be classics, right? But ones that would be really worth grabbing onto to lay a really good foundation for. Be nice if we all read them together.
I've been reading a little, not a lot, recently.
Yeah.
One of the books I'm reading now is by a fellow from way back, Smith Wigglesworth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's an old book, but it's good stuff. Gotta be careful with it.
Yeah, but you know what? He was a great preacher, well-known Pentecostal preacher, and went at tons and tons of miracles. And he's somebody that could easily be read. Absolutely. But I think it'll be a good mixture of Pentecostal stuff in that 10, and so on. So Mark and I'll give that some thought. Mm-hmm. I'll let him set the ball rolling, and then we'll go from there. We'll try to carefully select. I mean, there's no way it could be a total list, obviously, but it might be 10 basics, 10 really good. Mere Christianity, Mark, would be probably
Absolutely, yeah.
Mere Christianity.
Yeah, I'm thinking it would be some of these books between you and I, we would have access to them already.
Yeah.
And we might be able to, wrap them up or something, put them in an envelope and make them available. Somebody could swing by either the church or whatever, and just do a lender library with very specific books.
Yeah.
And put a little bit of pressure on them and say, hey, listen, you're taking this book, please read it the next week and bring it back, and then take another one, and just give people like 1 week or whatever to muscle their way through it, not just leave it on the shelf.
Right. Well, okay. We could get in touch with Paul Wilkinson. He may be able to help us get some copies like that too.
Yeah.
Right? The ones
I have the list. I can find them online.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, everything's available online. No question.
That's the other thing too. So leave with us. We'll get the list. We'll try to get that ASAP. Actually, while we're shut down right now is a wonderful time to do that. And that's good. That's excellent.
So can I read Romans 12 and 3 from the Message?
Sorry?
Can I read Romans 12 and 3 from the Message?
Yes. Yeah, please, Oral. Yes.
It says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fall into it without even thinking.
Yeah.
Instead, fix your attention to God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize that He wants what He wants from you, and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its lowest immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you.
That's pretty neat. That's like something like J.B. Phillips years ago did a one long before the Message. He said, "Don't let the world squeeze you into its mold."
Yes.
Yeah, the same verse. But that's good. It's very, very appropriate. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely appropriate. Absolutely appropriate. Transformed by a mental renewal. Yeah.
Fire in his bones.
That's also J. Smith, isn't it? Mark? that right? Are
Mark?
you there, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis. Got a copy right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are all possibilities.
Yeah.
Some of the classic, I think more of the classics would be better. Yeah, would be good. Yeah. Anyway, I'm just going to bring to close here in a minute. One more question that I just want to throw out there. Well, maybe two, and just quick answers. Why would learning have to be intentional? Why, if we're going to learn and read, why does it have to be intentional?
Because you can't pick it up by osmosis. You can't put the Bible under your pillow and wake up with more biblical knowledge.
No, no, that's right. That's right. But the other thing too is that it's like everything. If we're not intentional about it, it never happens.
No.
Right? It's the same thing about a physical workout or a walk or a jog or whatever, or getting up to pray. If we don't make it happen, it won't happen because the flesh doesn't want to do it. Right? The flesh doesn't want to do it. And I had one other question related to that, and I framed it this way. I think it was me. What dangers does the media have for accidental learners? Let's say accidental learners, non-intentional learners. What are the dangers of the media?
Well, then you'll get the new ager. You'll get a different spin
No,
on it.
what about any media? Any media. It doesn't matter if it's new age or not. Any media. What is the danger of all media when it comes to intentional learning?
Well, you just get what that person's thinking.
Yeah, and it chews up your time, right? It chews up so much of your time that you could be using. You get drawn to the media. I know one thing right now, and I tell you, I'm just as at fault as anybody on this one. Is you're watching the news, you're watching bits and pieces on Facebook, on all kinds of social media, and you can be really distracted. There's so much out there you want to read, but you can get away from really focusing on learning the word and reading.
Yeah.
Right? It just gets you all into different directions. Yeah. Yeah. That's again, I think we're all prone to that, you know.
Well, then I guess you just get busy. So you think you're busy, and then you're, you know, as you say, you're going to learn it because you're busy.
Yeah. But focus is everything in intentional learning. Yeah. Focus is everything. Yeah. I found, I'll leave you with this. I found that the times I could grasp the most and learn the most is when I push everything else aside and just focus on one thing, read that one book, or write that one sermon, or write that one lesson, and just push everything else out of the way. I find that's the most time I can be productive and learn. Yeah. Anyway, Pastor Mark, there you go. Lordy, I'll just say this though again. I want to make sure that we get the impression that when we refer to learning, we're not talking about formal education. It can be that. I mean, obviously, people take courses now, one course here, a course there, you know, whereas one time they couldn't do that. You couldn't do it online. You had to go physically to a campus and do it, which you don't have to do anymore. That age is past. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is learning as life goes on. It's all the time, every day. You know, all the time learning something about God and reading his word and reading books that have to do with his word and so on and so on it goes. Yeah. And a balance between the mind and the heart, because let us never fall into the trap of being so heady and so doctrinaire and so cold and formal that we lose the passion and lose the heart that has to go into it, because that's what matters, you know. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Pastor Mark, there you go.
Thank you very much, Pastor Ewen. Just want to wrap up by saying that, like Don Whitney's book, the whole intention to this learning that he's speaking about is for the purpose of godliness.
Yes.
So it's all about what are you reading, intentionally reading, so that you become more godly, right? So whether that's the Bible or whether that's, A.W. Tozer's The Knowledge of the Holy, whether it's, C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity, whether it's whatever, you are reading so that you become more like God.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't have anything to do with godliness, if that's not what it's driving you to, then you're not doing it.
Right.
Right. And so absolutely. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. And I did ask Ewan to do this because, he's got his doctorate. So he's got all the academic, and I'm sure he's, looking for more. That's part of the wisdom that he's got. But he's got all of that, more so than anybody else. And yet he's still very passionate about learning more. And so I really appreciate that about you, Pastor Ewan, and I'm glad you shared your heart. Thank you very much, Eleanor, for joining us this evening. Glad you're back in the country. And for Oral and Hilda and Kathy and everybody who's going to be watching this online later on. I've been recording it, and so hopefully everything's worked out. I don't know about your internet, but mine stalled a couple times. It kind of got a little bit glitchy. So I don't know if the video is going to pick that up. Probably will, but it is what it is, and we'll go ahead and pass it on this way. Well, how about we close off in prayer here? Kathy, could we get you to close in prayer? Would you be willing to do that?
Okay.
Yeah, and Mark, before she does, our website now, Kathy is our Kathy office has updated our website and actually arranged it much easier to follow, where all the sermons are up to March 8th. But after that, she has all these video things like our services, Bible studies are all linked. You can just go on, you can see them all there, click on them, you go in and watch them anytime. They're all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, oh Heavenly Father, for this study tonight. And thank you for the passion to learn and the willingness to learn and a good spirit and a good mind. So thank you for this good word, and that you give us that the wantingness to learn, and we just have to seek you. And thank you very much. We love you, and thank you for this wonderful word tonight. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Take care, everybody. One of these days, we'll get back to seeing each other face to face and shaking hands, maybe. Who knows? It'll be a while.